Welcome to Season 3 of Voices of Australia, where we embark on a journey through the heart of social cohesion. In this thought-provoking podcast series, we delve into the diverse tapestry of Australian society, weaving together the stories, experiences and perspectives that contribute to our nation's unity. From conversations with community leaders and experts in their fields, to personal narratives of everyday Australians, Voices of Australia Series 3 explores the challenges and triumphs of fostering social cohesion in a dynamic and ever-evolving society. Whether you're a seasoned advocate for social harmony or just beginning to explore the nuances of Australian identity, this podcast invites you to listen, learn and engage in the vital dialogue surrounding social cohesion. Nathaniel Diong is an award-winning youth advocate, startup mentor and CEO of Future Minds Network. His recognitions include Forbes 30 Under 30 list for social impact and Commonwealth Young Person of the Year Australia. Future Minds gives young people agency to choose the future they want. Their school, council and government programs have helped thousands of young people land their dream careers. Focusing on career skills like creativity and communication, students learn through building their own business, charity or project. Nathaniel is passionate about bringing more diverse voices into the room. He's graced the TEDx stage to inspire the next generation, designed entrepreneurship content at Monash University, and has spoken about the future of work on the international stage. Named as 2021 Young Australian of the Year finalist, Nathaniel has mentored diverse founders in over 30 startup programs. Welcome, Nathaniel. It's just fabulous to have you here. I have heard a great deal about the work that you do, and certainly anybody who looks at your website will see the extent and the range of different things that you do. But perhaps for anybody that hasn't seen it or isn't familiar, maybe you could tell us a little bit about Future Minds.
Of course, and thanks for having me, Anthea. It's a delight to be here. I'm the founder and CEO of Future Minds, and Future Minds is a social enterprise where we work with young people to learn the crucial social, technological, and entrepreneurial skills they need to face an uncertain future. And really, the catalyst of it came from my own personal experience. And I remember having this profound sense of helplessness coming out of high school and feeling like I didn't have the skills to face the future. And I just remember thinking, I've come out of a decade of education, but yet I don't feel any more prepared. And I'm really scared for what the future holds and whether I'll ever get a job. And so I started to think about, am I the only one that feels this way? And when I started to look around, I realized I wasn't. And the question that came to mind was, what would it take for us to prepare young people for the future?
What do you think was lacking from your education that made you feel that insecure when you left?
There's a lot of things. I think school prepares you well to live a conventional path. And it says that once you go through high school, you then go to further education in university. And once you go through university, you'll eventually find where you want to go in your career. But what it doesn't really account for is the fact that the future is so uncertain. And we know the statistics that show that 85% of the jobs that young people work in by 2030 don't even exist yet. So how can we go to a university for a degree that doesn't exist? And how do we even begin to comprehend where we fit in a world that we don't totally understand? And so I think that piece of education was missing for me because I didn't understand where I fit in a bigger societal picture.
Now, you're of Malaysian Australian heritage. Do you think that affected your sense of belonging and that sense of fitting within the wider society?
Definitely. It was very challenging growing up because it felt that wherever I went, I was a foreigner. So when I was in Malaysia, I wasn't Asian enough to be Malaysian. And when I was in Australia, I wasn't Australian enough to be a local either. And so I often felt, caught up in between these two worlds. So I think definitely that sense of belonging and connection was difficult because I didn't resonate with either of the communities that compromised my identity. Mm-hmm. So I didn't know where I fit there.
There's that phrase, the perpetual foreigner, that a lot of people do feel that they don't fit anywhere.
That's right.
And that can be incredibly unsettling. Mm-hmm. And certainly from a social cohesion perspective, it doesn't lend itself to giving people a sense of belonging or welcome for that matter. Do you think that there are elements of belonging or well-being or that are important to a young person's identity that the broader society or education can contribute to?
Yes, definitely. I think education plays such an important role in social cohesion. First and foremost, it's such a powerful socializing agent for young people to actually access their peers, to access positive social interactions and even role models, to make them feel that they are part of something bigger than themselves. But I think there's also that skills and development component that I touched on a bit earlier. And it's almost that, the more that we are able to interact with those around us, the more we learn and start to acquire skills like empathy and start to acquire things like communication and conflict resolution. But when we're not put in those inclusive environments, we essentially aren't able to thrive because we aren't challenged in the right ways and we don't get to meet the right connections.
Was there sort of debate within your family as to which expectations you should be living up to, or was everybody on the same page about where you should go? Because you really did chart your own course, but I'm assuming your family had some view about what that course should look like.
Yeah, of course. I feel like this is going to online therapy, but this is, it's a great question. Right? I think there was a lot of conflict between me and my family about what my path should be. And like, the stories of many migrants, my parents wanted me to be in a stable career. They wanted me to be, a doctor, engineer, or something that they knew could be a well-paying job. But for me, as much as I was interested in some of those fields, I felt that I wanted to live a life of purpose. And I looked at the world and saw so many challenges that we weren't addressing. And I just couldn't understand how I could go on and live my life and do a job ignoring the fact that these issues were still persisting. And so I think that's where some of the conflict arose. Yeah.
You said that Future Minds was set up as a social enterprise, and social enterprises is one of those things that you help and coach young people into setting up their own. Why do you think social enterprise is such an attractor for young people?
Yeah, it's such a great question. Look, I think there are three main things that are really driving that. The first thing is an impact-driven mindset. And many young people are deeply concerned about social and environmental challenges. And we see that 82% of them are exclusively buying from brands that have, ethical and purpose first. The second big thing is purpose, which I mentioned a bit earlier. We're seeing that purpose is the number one driver for these career decisions. Even greater than salary packaging and, all of these traditionally very high value sort of factors in career choices. Young people want more than a paycheck. 2 in 3 young people are wanting their employers to integrate purpose in their daily work in some shape or form. And I think the third thing is just, the innovation and risk mindset that young people have. They're much more willing to challenge the status quo and not just accept the way things are. And so I think that's what really, brings that appeal of social enterprise, because it's the combination of all those things.
So why do you think you can't achieve those things by setting up a business? Why is social enterprise in particular? Because it's more obvious that that's the connection?
I wouldn't say that you can't do it in a business. I think it's still achievable in a business. I think the distinction is really intention, because social enterprise is essentially just business with purpose. And it's business that the main driver is business. It's not at the, It's not at the, what's the word for it? I've lost the word. What I'm trying to say is you can have purpose and profit at the same time, whereas business is, the sole driver is profit. So I think what makes that model more appealing to young audiences is realizing that purpose comes first, but it's not at the expense of profit.
Yeah. So there are many individuals that we come across, certainly, who are very active within their, are very interested in setting up their own social enterprise, but they're also incredibly active within their own communities. So do you think that activity within community comes first, or is that an important component in people understanding how they can make a contribution to their community before they go down the path of setting up a social enterprise?
I think that there isn't one way to go about creating change. There is an important role for business as there is for social enterprise. The point to community is very powerful, right? Because, when I think about what social cohesion really means for young people, there are three things that come to mind, right? The first thing is it's the degree of connectedness, solidarity, and trust. So when I refer to connectedness, what I mean is that it's this feeling that you are part of a community bigger than yourself. It's a sense of belonging, of shared identity. When I talk about solidarity, I'm looking at what are the shared challenges that we both experience? What are the lived experiences that we've been through that shape who we are today? What are the values? What are the norms? And then trust. Right? And this is the one that we often forget, and one of the most important. Trust is built when we create the right environments for young people to feel valued, to feel heard, to feel empowered to actively participate in their communities. And so that might be, organizing their own community events. That might be campaigns. That might be their local organizations and clubs, right? There are so many different ways that young people can engage. And so I think coming back to that community's point, it is really important for us to have ways that we can encourage active engagement. It's not a passive.
Yeah. So do you think local communities, because we know that people get a lot of their sort of sense of identity from their local communities as they're growing up, is there a greater role that local community should be doing in order to encourage and enhance the opportunities for young people?
Yes. There's a very easy answer to that. I think you and I both know.
Yeah.
The more difficult question is how. Right.
Well, that's where I was going. So did you want to go down the how
We can go down the how path. Look, I think first and foremost, it's important to acknowledge there are resource barriers, right? And there are network barriers. And beyond that, look, I think the real way that we can engage young people and encourage more social cohesion in our communities is just by providing the right, meaningful opportunities for young people to engage. It's giving young people a chance to actually go out and lead initiatives to address the issues that matter to them. And so the first thing that comes to mind is, youth advisory boards. Back in 2020, we asked ourselves this question of how might we make young people feel more part of a community? And the simple answer was, we need to make them feel like their voices are heard and valued. And what better way to do that through an advisory board? So we were approached by a major philanthropic funder, and they had interest in investing in young people, but they didn't know where to start. And so we had this back and forth, what do we do? What mechanisms might we use? And then we landed on this idea of, okay, let's start a youth advisory board. But instead of being conventional and just getting them to share about their challenges and lived experience, let's use that youth advisory board to influence investment. And let's put these young people as the people who are judging where money goes, where it flows, and whether the investments we're making are actually creating the right impact for these young people and influencing them in the right ways. And so we did. That philanthropic organization ended up getting around 10 lived experience advisors to join their board from all different backgrounds. And they now invest over 10 million annually into supporting young people's well-being. And what we saw was this incredible success rate, because for the first time, young people weren't seen as a problem to be solved, but they were part of the solution. And that was able to create that sense of social cohesion, because they were no longer at the outskirts of the community, but they were part of the community who are helping their own community. And I think that's really where, the impact lies. So when I think about youth advisory boards, some other great examples come to mind, like the Office for Youth Victorian Youth Congress, for example, or CMY's Culture Spring, the Centre for Multicultural Youth. Yeah. There are so many other mechanisms I can think of. Like I think about, how might we encourage young people to lead their own programs and initiatives? And that's very much where we started as an organization back in 2017, 2018. And so what we did was we had this program called Future Hack. And we decided, I was 16 at the time, so it was a very interesting decision for me to create this big idea. But I said, I want to get 100 young people in one room from 5 different schools, and I want them to create solutions to the problems they see in their local communities. We started with the UN 17 SDGs, so looking at things like no poverty, like water, like climate, energy, social development goals, right? And over the course of 3 months, we helped them develop solutions that helps the communities. We had students who ended up creating riverside cleanup initiatives. We had students who turned old and ugly fruit into skincare masks. And tackling food waste. We had students who started mentorship programs for low SES students to access, the right networks and professional support. Yeah. And it was just such a wonderful moment for us to be able to give young people the power to see what they were suffering from and be able to solve that directly. Yeah. And I think that's what's really needed when we talk about social cohesion, is giving power back to the community. Rather than trying to solve it for them.
How have many of those continued on? Have they become social enterprises in themselves through your program?
Yeah, many. And we've had social enterprises come out where they've started as this very small idea, but now they've sent 10,000 encouragement letters to the elderly to help tackle social isolation. And they have a team of 1,000 volunteers. And so you see that, we see the seed start with us and that scale continue to grow. Yeah. On average, we have our alumni who stay in touch with us for, over 6 years, and they continue coming back to us when they need to get employment, to land internships, to access the right mentors and networks. And so, yeah, we're at a point where I guess we're really proud of the community we've been able to create.
Yeah. Can you give us perhaps 1 or 2 examples of really successful social enterprises and how they decided in themselves what success would look like?
Yeah. The one that I mentioned before was a really great one for us. And I think success for them was really simple. They're not at a point where it's their sole job. They do have a separate job on the side, but success for them was really about being able to understand the challenges that were being had in that community and feeling like they could actively be a part of it. And so they started with this very simple idea of, how might we tackle social isolation? What does it look like to be able to connect with somebody on a human level? And put a smile on their face. And to them, that's what success is. For many others, success is revenue. Success is the number of customers. So we have other people who've started 3D printing face shield companies. And for them, the success metric for them is how many people are not contracting COVID. And so, there's a very big spectrum, right?
Yeah, that's a big aim.
Yeah, a big aim between smiles on someone's faces and people who are not getting COVID-19 and having better healthcare outcomes. But I think the common thread there, right, is just thinking about impact as a community-led approach rather than an individual approach.
Yeah. So if we talk about, so you do also talk about innovation, which is clearly part of the underlying aspect that young people bring to different ideas. But I imagine that they're tapping in a lot more to technology, and particularly how fast-paced and changing technology is. Are you seeing that being a key part of how people are maximising the opportunity in social enterprises or business?
So your question's around, do you think technology is helping maximize those opportunities for social enterprise? Yeah. Look, definitely. I think technology plays a huge role in, the way that it's transforming even how our business operates. I would say that within the social enterprise sector, we are a slow adopter of technology. So I think we have a long way to go. Okay. It's something I've noticed in the charity sector as well, is that, there are a lot of barriers for us to understand what emerging technology looks like. I think conventionally the most that we understand or push the boundaries right now is around artificial intelligence and AI, right? And that's a hot topic for every charity and social enterprise. But I wouldn't say that we've been able to integrate it in the right way yet. So I think there's definitely a lot of room for improvement there.
Have you got some thoughts about how they could do that?
Definitely. I have many. Look, I think it's understanding that technology is innately also a human problem. And that's something that we don't normally talk about. We often talk about technology advancements and we think about, okay, what's the next equipment or upgrade that we can have? But we don't realize the power of technology as a human experience. So, for example, like we look at the digital divide and we say, oh, that's terrible. People don't have access to internet. Yes, that's true. Yes, we're seeing that those who can't access online connectivity are also not being able to access networks and, education opportunities and mentorship and all of these things. But I think the bigger part of the human side of technology is we have to start asking bigger questions about what makes us uniquely human and what it all means. So if we have artificial intelligence, does that affect how we view human intelligence? Yeah. And what is better?
Some of what you've talked about seems to suggest that young people that are going down the profit for purpose type model tend to be trying to find those very human connections. They're looking for ways to foster networking and social interaction in that way. But at the same time, so we've also heard from young people that they are very familiar with the infrastructure of technology, but they don't necessarily know how to use technology for career advancement or for some of those very practical sorts of things that they need, that technology can help them with, but they don't necessarily know how to utilize them. Yeah. So there are real strengths within young people and things that we should be harnessing more through youth advisory boards and a whole variety of different ways. But there's still some stuff that isn't quite in as far as it should be for young people. Are you, because you do a lot of training, you do training for those, for CEOs and corporates, as well as for the young people themselves. What gaps are you seeing in them that they need to close in order to be able to progress the sorts of careers that they want to have?
That's a great question. Look, I think the gaps, a lot of the big gaps are actually the interpersonal skills and the human skills of things. It's the enterprising skills. And so like you said, technology is great for them. We see that, 82% of young people very confident to be able to, hack different applications to create the outcome that they want. The research shows that, we are having a generation that's more digitally literate than ever.
Yeah.
Right. But like you said, there are gaps for them to actually look at, well, okay, we know how to use technology now, but how does that actually relate to our role in society? How does that help us advance in our employment, advance in our careers? And so I think the missing gap really is that interpersonal element of things. I think that, skills like creativity and communication and innovation are buzzwords that are thrown around, but we aren't teaching in education properly. And so I think where the big gaps that I find for corporates and companies is, one, there's an intergenerational gap. So there's a different understanding of what the world looks like for generations. And so I have a lot of CEOs coming to me and saying, I don't understand how Gen Z is thinking this way. They're not showing up to work. They have different priorities. We're giving them all this benefits, but they don't seem to be receptive to any of this. And I think it's just because priorities are changing. Like we mentioned this earlier in the podcast that, Gen Z are prioritizing purpose over salary packaging. And so when these companies are coming forward and being like, we're going to give you benefits and promotions, young people are actually saying, well, I don't actually care about that right now. It is important, but it's not the most important thing on my list. And so I think there are these gaps of understanding of what's important to each generation, but also gaps in understanding different working styles.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because when you think about a career or career options, to go and work for a large organisation gives you some sort of buffer around that, in that they are generally, not always, but generally around helping you to develop skills and to progress how those skills might actually be able to make an impact within the organisation. And so as long as you turn up, you are being supported. But running your own social enterprise or hoping to set up something like that, especially when you feel that you don't necessarily have 100% of the skills that you need, can be incredibly exhausting. And so I imagine that the challenge is for an organisation such as yours is to help individuals to be supported through those times when they might be a little sort of overwhelmed by the challenges in order to get a business off the ground or a social enterprise off the ground. How do you go about giving them that sort of mental and moral support?
I think for us, one of the big things is knowing it's not a one-size-fits-all. And you would have seen this with the organizations that you support at Scanlon too, right? Is that, they are coming from very different places. And so I think it's that human experience of being able to sit down and say, thank you for coming and asking for help, because that's the first big step. Yeah. And that's one of the hardest things to do. And then going and trying the problem solving route and thinking about, okay, is it networks that they're actually missing? Is it, like you said, core knowledge and skills they're missing? And where can we plug those gaps? Who can we introduce them to? Yeah. Because a lot of social enterprise and business is about learning by doing. You can't learn everything from a textbook or an MBA. You can learn some really crucial building blocks, but a lot of that comes from experience. And so for us, it's about, having that connection around, these are the next steps that you might be able to take. It's not going to guarantee you get to that destination, but it's definitely going to give you more clarity. And I think it's about identifying those things.
So universities have been, over the last little while, have been trying to emphasise far more industry skills or the development of sort of the more practical application of what you're doing or giving you more opportunities to interact with businesses. Is that coming through, or are you finding that you're coming across more young people that is still sort of just wanting to avoid what university seems to represent?
I think there are two parts to my answer. The first is that the important context is there's decreasing trust from young people in institutions, whether that's government, whether that's university. And we are having record lows in Australia of university entrance because young people no longer see that as the only career route that they can go, the only entrance route they can go to advance their careers. I think part of that reason is because university offers conventional pathways, but they have not yet adapted to some of the other emerging industries that we're seeing. Permanent example, startups and social enterprise. You can't go into a degree for a Masters of Social Enterprise. There are now some Masters of Entrepreneurship courses, but I would say there's only about one or two in all of.
But that's a
master's level, exactly.
What we want is people at the undergraduate level.
Exactly. And so one is that trust and not having the options there. I think the second thing with universities is there's a lot of red tape to get across. It is a big system. And there are a lot of conflicting priorities even within university. We actively work with a lot of universities. So, Melbourne Business School, Monash Business School, Monash University, RMIT University. And they are trying. They are trying to really integrate entrepreneurship and more practical skills. But where it's lacking is just the connection to industry, as ironic as it seems, because there are so many emerging industries that are hard to tap into. There is a very high barrier of entry to social enterprise. There is a very high barrier of entry to startups. And we don't fully understand the extent of what jobs can come out of them yet. And so I think that's part of the barrier for university right now.
So as governments start thinking more about social cohesion, but also hopefully being more aware of the systems that are potentially creating hurdles rather than opportunities, what do you think state and federal governments should be doing to encourage more young people? And are you seeing that? Are you seeing examples of state or federal governments or even local governments actually putting things in place in order to foster this type of innovation or activity?
The first thing I would say is investment, right? Investment in external providers.
Dollars of some description.
Dollars of some description. Because we are a growing innovation ecosystem. Like we are trying to get there, but the investment's not going into the right places. And so I think greater investment into, education players that don't necessarily fit into an institution, that are able to work with young people of scale outside of just their proximity, right? Because a lot of institutions are restricted to purely work based on...
So some sort of a vehicle that fosters social entrepreneurs.
Yes. Okay. So great investment in that sense. I think the other big thing that we know and we have known for a while is risk tolerance. Mm-hmm. We don't take enough risk as an Australian government into things that matter. And so when we do, there is a lot of hot water and backlash. We see this through like initiatives like Breakthrough Victoria, right? Mm-hmm. Where there was like some fantastic investment into like deep tech and fintech across Australia. But the ways that the investment were used could have been spread more effectively, right? So I think it's really, when we look across the world at, the US or even within our Asia Pacific, let's not go as far as the US because they're probably a great example and maybe too big of scale for us. Mm-hmm. So even if we look at Asia Pacific and Thailand, right? The way that, their government is approaching startups and the innovation ecosystem, they're accommodating so much more risk than us. There's so much more capital flowing into education, into innovation, and they're willing for some experiments to fail for them to have lessons. We are not. And we are having a lot of budget cuts too. And so, I think it's the environment that the Australian government almost has to see, well, where are our priorities really going to lie? Because yes, we can, focus on, the core areas of funding we always have, but we are not going to progress as an economy if we don't start taking some more risk. And
so do you think government is also a little short-term in its views about what success might look like? I mean, do you think they're a bit too prescriptive in identifying success factors too early on?
Definitely. Because they're like I mentioned, there's so much that we don't understand yet about what the future of work looks like. And so for us to be prescriptive and say, this is the path that we're going to go down, and we're going to put all our eggs in this basket, is not the way that you want someone to be leading a country. We want to be future focused in the way that we're thinking. And instead of trying to train young people for a certain skill or a certain career path, we should be training them for adaptability and innovation. We should be training them with skills where regardless of their career, they can still use those skills effectively. So I'm talking, creativity and innovation and problem solving. They can be used in any career, but they're not being taught in our school system. So how can we start to rethink about what those look like? Because traditionally, when we think about problem solving, we think about maths, we think about science. But how do we actually apply that to other areas of our lives? When you're a project manager in a big corporate firm, you really need to do some complex problem solving. So how do we start to teach those skills really early on so that young people can navigate chaos and change? That's the really big question that I have.
Yeah, well, it's a challenge for businesses anyway. So I imagine that's something that corporates are hoping that young people will bring to their businesses as well. I'm intrigued about Future Minds because you're a young person setting up an organisation like Future Minds, but you won't be young forever. So I'm wondering what your plans are for Future Minds in order to ensure that it stays focused on young people as you progress through your generations.
Yeah, well, I've thought a lot about this, and I think for us, we've been really intentional about having succession plans, and what that means for me is when I cross my threshold, which I set as 30, we will pass the organisation on to another young person in a different generation. And so we've seen this model actually work quite effectively in organisations like you would have heard of Oak Tree, where they have, a minimum age requirement that it was 25, but I think it's now 26 or something. But after 26, they pass it on to the next generation. Yeah. And I think that it's that concept of, as much as I want longevity for me to stay there forever, I'm not going to understand the challenges of young people forever. Yeah. And I have to be cognizant of that. We're already seeing that, when we're talking about Gen Z entering the workforce, Gen Alpha is right around the corner. So how are we starting to think about the differences between them entering the workforce as well. And so, a lot of companies right now are struggling already with working with millennials. We're already 2 steps behind. So, I think for us, it's really being cognizant that the gap between generations is getting bigger and bigger. And we need to be having more intergenerational dialogue and conversation, opening up this can of worms.
Yeah. So what do you see your future career look like after 30? What are the next contributions you would like to make to the things that you feel really passionate about?
To be honest, I don't know. I would love the answer to that now, because it'd be like a crystal ball for me to look into. But look, I think I do really have a passion for education, and it has really this transformative power to change someone's life. I'm really fascinated about where technology is going. We talk about the digital divide and the work that we do there, but beyond that, we're seeing emerging technology in Industry 4.0, and the applications of that are just astounding. Like the fact that we can put random words into a language learning model, and that can give us answers, that can give us AI generated videos, it can give us images. It's just bizarre. But when you look beyond AI in cloud computing and big data, there's endless applications for where technology can go.
Absolutely. So part of the issues that you've highlighted are to do with systems, that systems don't move fast enough, and they don't necessarily, they aren't flexible enough around some of the sorts of things that we need to see change, like the education system. Yes. And it will be great if you can make a contribution to that aspect of what we do. But I'm also intrigued about the whole intergenerational piece, because right now, the way you talk, and I think it's probably for ease of reference rather than anything else, but thinking about the millennials and Gen X and Gen Y and then the next generation that's coming along, and we tend to try to want to put characteristics around those generations. But as they move through their careers and their worlds, how do you think intergenerationally they're going to communicate, rather than sort of cutting them off at you've got to a certain point, now you're old. So how do you can't relate to everybody down here. How do we get that intergenerational awareness of what each different age group can actually contribute?
Yeah, well, Australian TV thinks that the answer is lamb. You've seen the intergenerational lamb commercial. Sure. But look, I think it really is... it's simple. It's dialogue, and intentional dialogue at that. Mm-hmm. And I think that we don't have that at some of the highest levels. Like when we look at government, one of the big problems that we're facing is that when it comes to young people's issues and the work that we've done for Office for Youth and Department of Education, all of these people, there's such a big disconnect between who is making the decisions and who is being affected by the decisions. And I think there just has to be a bridge for us to be able to communicate what are the challenges that we're experiencing, because generations are different. Yeah. The way technology has affected your generation versus mine, completely different. We're seeing, in Gen Z and Gen Alpha, technology addiction is a huge issue. Huge issue. And of course, all the young people say, "You're wrong, Mom. Like, it's not the phone." But sometimes it is. And so I think the key to sort of unpacking a lot of this, almost getting on the same page across generations, is having these open chambers for discussion, for us to be able to influence real change. Yeah. Because a lot of times it is tokenistic. And so we have young people coming in and advising government, or we have young people being advocates and champions. But where does that information actually go? Because they're not the implementers. Mm-hmm. And so I come back to this reference that I made around the investment and young people actually leading that investment. That's a really great example of how generations are coming together, because the power is in the hands of both people. It's not in one. Mm-hmm. And the young people who are being affected are actually looking at this investment and saying, this money is going to the right place. Mm-hmm. And so I think that's really the key, is getting people on that same playing field and looking at those power dynamics and going, we can actually be on the same page here, because it's going to help us achieve both the same outcome or even better. Yeah.
No, it's a really important point. And so there are increasing number of local governments certainly that are aware of the need for community forums. But their community forums, even though there are some that have held them in person, do tend to be gravitating towards sort of regular surveys on issues going out electronically. So you're shifting away from this in-person cross-generational opportunities to come together and talk about an issue, and shifting to, oh no, we'll just send the survey out and anybody that wants to answer it can. But you tend to get a particular skew as to the people that are answering those surveys. So do you think that, because where we started was you talking about that hack that you brought together of the 100 young people thinking about things, do you think that type of community forum to talk about particular issues is an important way that local governments and local areas can actually work through some of these things and get the different ideas coming together and working towards a common solution?
Definitely.
Yeah.
Because I think it really comes back to it allows for a sense of ownership and responsibility to solve things in community. Yeah. Because otherwise people are working in silos. And I think what was really beautiful about Future Hack was, I now think about your generation point. What we were really intentional about was that when young people were building these solutions, they weren't building this in isolation with community. We were running in parallel a mentorship program where they were meeting people 20 years their senior, 30 years their senior, and they were gaining insights of what they'd learnt over the time and getting insights of how their life experience had shaped them. And so in that instance, the mentorship wasn't so much about saying, I'm older, so I have more experience than you, and I know this problem better than you, but rather it was about sharing and having that open dialogue, like you said, and just saying, I see this issue too from a different lens. And, what you shared with me is actually really interesting because I've never thought about it that way. And perhaps if we can come together, we can solve it in a completely different way to the ways that we've been thinking about in the past. Absolutely. And so I think having those forums to actually, one, have that meaningful connection within community and connect with people you otherwise wouldn't connect with. But two, actually having the space to be creative and to challenge the norm and to go out and develop those solutions, giving them permission to actually lead those things is so powerful.
Yeah, and discover that you've got similar concerns about the sorts of things that are going on in your world.
Maybe we're not so far apart than we think, right?
Very true.
And I think that was what it brought out.
This has been a terrific conversation, and thank you so very much. Just as a final question, though, I am interested in whether or not you think your Malaysian Australian experience and culture actually comes to bear in the ways that you think through problems, because sometimes I think people aren't necessarily aware of the fact of the great value that their own cultural heritage brings to the sort of problem solving or the way they see the world that is actually helpful to everybody in understanding.
Definitely. I used to say to people that I think like a Malaysian, but I act like an Australian.
So what do you think
that
means?
Let me break that down. So when I talk about I think like a Malaysian, community is always front and center of my mind. Our society in Malaysia is not homogenous at all. Not that Australia is, but we don't think of ourselves as an individual. We think as ourselves as part of a bigger community. Yeah. In Malaysia we have Malaysian Chinese, Malaysian Indians, Malaysian Malays, and you'll be surprised to see, Malaysian Indians being able to be fluent in Cantonese and Hokkien. And so we don't actually even have a national language. All of us speak at least 4 or 5. Yeah. And so it's almost like we've been able to permeate, our cultures have permeated each other just by the fact that we don't think of ourselves as homogenous groups. So that's why I say I think like a Malaysian in my approach to community. But when I say I act like an Australian, I'm willing to challenge the status quo, which is something Malaysians won't do. They're very fixed in their way of this has to be done this way and everything is this way because it works. And so that's what I mean when I'm Australian is I'm willing to challenge the status quo. I'm willing to think differently. And I'm willing to be braver in how we try to connect socially. So I think it's just that balance of, each of these cultures have some really interesting positives and really interesting negatives as well. But having that balance for me has been really great.
It's such an important component of what resources that we have within Australia is people that have come from multiple different backgrounds that speak multiple languages. It's just it's something that we really should be, I think, more capable of appreciating and bringing to the fore. Nathaniel, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you and learning more about Future Minds and thinking more about young people. So thank you very much.
Thank you for the opportunity. Yeah.
Thank you for listening to our Voices of Australia podcast. For more episodes like this one, you can visit the Scanlon Institute website at scanloninstitute, or one word, .org.au.